Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Jewish Museum. My name is Jenna Weiss. I'm the manager of public programs here, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Dialogue and Discourse featuring Eric Marcus, Ross Bleckner, and Deborah Kass. This event is held in partnership with the Stonewall 50 Consortium, an organization that brings together scores of nonprofit institutions and organizations committed to producing programming, exhibitions, and educational materials related to the Stonewall uprising and the history of the LGBTQ civil rights movement in the context of the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall uprising in June 2019. I would like to thank my education department colleagues, particularly Chris Gartrell and Jamie Oriema, for initiating our connection to Stonewall 50 and for their help on tonight's event. We are hosting a number of upcoming programs as part of this partnership, both for adults and teens. So for updates on everything we have coming up this season, please visit our website to sign up for our e-news. Now I would like to introduce this evening's speakers, beginning with our moderator and chair of the Stonewall 50 Consortium, Eric Marcus. Marcus is co-founder and host of the award-winning Making Gay History podcast, which mines his decades-old audio archive of rare interviews to create intimate, personal portraits of both known and long-forgotten champions, heroes, and witnesses to LGBTQ history. He is the author of a dozen books, including Breaking the Surface, the best-selling autobiography of Olympic diving champion Greg Louganis. Marcus was introduced to art early in life by his father, who was a student of Leslie Fleigel, a local New York City artist and follower of the Ashcan School. Eric, whose nickname was Eggy, was a frequent subject of his father's work and even dabbled in watercolors himself, but came to discover that he was far better with words than with paint. Ross Bleckner was born in New York City and received a Bachelor of Arts from New York University in 1971 and a Master of Fine Arts from CalArts in 1973, and has taught at many of the nation's most prestigious universities. During his career, he has exhibited throughout the United States and internationally at venues such as SF MoMA, ICA Philadelphia, Kunsthal Zurich, Moderna Museet in Stockholm, and many others. In 1995, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York held a major retrospective of his work, and he has had recent exhibitions in Cologne, Brussels, and Vienna, and will have an exhibition opening this April at Petzel Gallery in New York. For 10 years, Bleckner served as the president of the AIDS Community Research Initiative of America, a nonprofit community-based AIDS research and treatment center, and in 2009 was awarded the title of Goodwill Ambassador by the United Nations for his work helping to rehabilitate child soldiers in northern Uganda. Drawing from contemporary society, Broadway musicals, Yiddish, and prominent art figures, Deborah Kass incorporates lyrics and vernacular, melding art history and pop culture in vibrant, resonating compositions. Kass received her BFA in painting from Carnegie Mellon University in 1974 and attended the Whitney Independent Study Program. Her work has been the subject of numerous one-person exhibitions, and in the fall of 2012, the Andy Warhol Foundation presented her mid-career retrospective accompanied by the publication of her monograph, Deborah Kass, Before and Happily Ever After. She is the recipient of several awards, including an NEA Fellowship in Painting, and her work is in the collections of major museums, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, the Whitney Museum, the Jewish Museum, and the MFA Boston. Kass serves as a senior critic in the MFA painting program at Yale University. Now, if everyone can take a moment to please silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Eric Marcus, Ross Bleckner, and Deborah Kass.
You may have noticed a resemblance between me and that drawing. I only found it just a few years ago. So I'm Eric Marcus, Deb Kass, Ross Bleckner. You turn on your microphones. That's for you.
Hello. I'm going to turn my chair because that light is intense. What?
Okay. Here, you take that. And so they can only, no, Ross, please. Don't put it there. when you speak, you just need to hold the microphone close to your mouth so they can hear you. And
I got it.
okay, good. And if at any point you can't hear us in the audience, just wave so that we know you're not able to hear us and we'll speak up. So this is how the evening's going to go. We're going to talk for about 45 minutes. I have questions for you. And then we'll take questions from the audience. So first I'd like to start with when did the two of you first become aware of each other's work?
Oh.
Deb?
Well, he's making us think already.
I'm making you think, but Ross, no one can hear you if you don't hold the microphone.
Oh,
I said, I don't know, I've
like always.
I think I kind of have known Deb's work. I've known Deb. Actually, I think I know Deb before I knew your work.
It was the 80s, definitely.
Definitely the 80s.
Definitely the
I
80s.
agree with that.
And we were young.
So it's the olden days.
We know each other from the olden days.
Okay.
I guess.
So was there any sense of kinship because you're both Jewish and gay?
No.
None.
But I always liked Deb and her kind of... What?
You said batting 1,000. My questions are going over really well.
I just liked her wattage.
And what wattage might you give Deb?
What?
Wattage. What kind of wattage? 60 watts, 100 watts, 250?
A lot. She was very present and positive and affirmative, and what can I say? Her work, even though I don't quite remember it, you're gonna have to remind me in about the 80s. I remember starting definitely from Barbara. Just give me a...
From Barbara, meaning for people in the audience who don't know what you're referring to.
Barbara, portraits of Barbara Streisand done in the style of Andy Warhol.
Okay. So, Deb...
Am I right?
Yeah,
What
you might
was
have
it
known me a little bit before.
I know, but what was it before? Tell me if I remember.
The paintings are called the art history paintings.
And
They're kind of conglomerations of other artists' work that sort of create a new narrative from basically men's work.
I don't know if I know those paintings.
Okay, you may not.
So after, we'll
Where
look
did
at
you
them
show
later.
them?
Simon Watson.
Is there one up here?
If
Yes, the first one.
When it comes up,
Okay.
we'll point
It'll
it
come
out.
up.
Point it
Yeah,
out.
They're-
yeah.
they're
Maybe I do
cycling
know
through.
them, and I don't remember.
So,
them.
Yeah.
for you, Deb, was there any sense of kinship because Ross is gay and Jewish, or is that
I
question
think
a
I
doubt?
felt a kinship with Ross because we're from Long Island.
And that's gay and Jewish.
And that is pretty damn gay and Jewish.
You don't get more Jewish than that.
I
I don't know about gay.
I grew up way west of
good.
there in Queens. So, Ross, where on Long Island did you grow up? I know where you did, but they don't know.
Oh, God.
Lay it out there, baby.
It's called the Five Towns. You hear those moanings and groanings?
The five,
know.
so for those who don't
They
know, the
know
five
what I've
towns
had
are.
to suffer through.
I
to
think
become-
everyone does know the five towns.
So
They-
You heard the reaction.
who in the audience knows what the five towns are and can name them? Look at that.
Who
Hewlett.
remembers Lomans? Lomans.
So that's Hewlett.
I used to go with my mother to Loman's once a week. Once a week to Loman's in the basement. And then across the street.
in the big dressing room with the ladies.
Yeah, and then across the street
Yeah.
to Shores.
So, Deb, what towns did you grow up in? So, Ross, you grew up in Hewlett, and Deb, you grew
Rockville Center, not a five town.
up. Okay. So it was a.
I used to say,
No, Rockville Center is actually it's the center of the diocese, the Catholic diocese of New York, of Long Island. So.
Right.
yeah, but it was strictly Jewish and Catholic.
Right. Right.
In your part, it was Jewish. I'm sure you lived in a.
Right.
It was probably a part, right?
Well, we lived actually next to the restricted Catholic golf club. Well, like went right through the whole town.
Restricted to Catholics or to Jews?
It was a Catholic club,
Oh, okay.
Restricted
No
to Catholics.
Jews.
Yes. Yes.
except for like making out late at night in high school
Sneaking.
with your boyfriend.
Okay.
Then the Jews were in there.
So,
We were. boyfriend.
So you both came of age in the 1960s.
Is this going like you thought it would?
I could say oi for that, you know. Oi.
Yeah. No,
I had no expectations.
Good.
I had no expectations except to expect wild things. So I know you. We met many years ago. I know of you, and I figured the combination would be would be like alchemy. So here we are. So you both came of age in the 1960s.
60s?
60s, yes. You came of age in the 60s.
No, we were barely, I would say 70s more.
Well, but no. I'll get to the 70s in a minute.
That's sex.
I'll get to the 70s. But let's stay in the
talking
60s for a second.
teenage years.
Oh, okay.
Growing up.
Let me translate.
So what role did being Jewish or did Judaism have in your identity? We're here at the Jewish Museum, so we're going to talk about being Jewish, and we're also, as part of the Stonewall 50 celebration, we're going to talk about being gay. So that's the range of what we're talking about, and your art. So what did being Jewish...
I'm going to take this one.
Okay, good.
All right.
I will too.
Okay, of course. Ladies first.
But go ahead. That means...
You know what? When I said that, I was like, go ahead.
I think we're going to take this...
We did not rehearse this.
We're going to take this on the road.
No, I'm going to jump in because I have experience with this question and you don't.
Okay.
You don't have as much as I do.
I defer to you. Go
No,
ahead.
no. That's why I'm saving you.
Okay.
So, okay. What was the question?
What role does being Jewish, or did being Jewish, or Judaism have in growing up?
Oh, and growing up?
Well, yeah, in the 60s, what role did it have in your identity?
Well, I think Ross will identify with this. My world was an almost totally Jewish world. So yes, there were Catholics in my town. Some were even friends of mine, but mainly the Catholic people went to St. Agnes. So my public school was predominantly Jewish. So it was absolutely the atmosphere I grew up in. And there was no anti-Semitism because we were all Jewish. Okay.
Did you go to Hebrew school?
I did, but that's a real story.
We have time. We're in good company.
All right. Well, it's not that big of a story.
Was it Orthodox, Reform,
not at
or
all.
Conservative?
Totally Reform. My grandparents on my father's side spoke Yiddish and Russian and just a little bit of English. And my father grew up in a pretty devout situation. You know, he grew up in Queens, and but we were members of the Reform Temple, Central Synagogue. My father was president of the men's club. He participated in things like musicals called My Fair Sadie, where he was Professor Schwartz and the star. And I went to Hebrew school, but it was Reform. I never learned one bit of Hebrew.
Oi. You learned oi?
Well, that I learned at home.
Oh.
I mean, I'm not talking Yiddish. I mean, I can't read Hebrew. I don't understand. And that's it. So it was just the amniotic fluid I grew up in.
Okay. Ross, microphone.
Go ahead.
Were you bar mitzvah?
I went to Temple Bethel, and I got a Jewish education on Saturdays, and we spent all day figuring out how to jump out the ground floor windows, which we all did every Saturday. So I got kicked out of Temple Bethel, but my parents did want me to be bar mitzvah. It's actually an interesting story because then that was a conservative temple. My parents were conservative, my grandparents were Orthodox. Then they had to join Temple Israel in Lawrence, Long Island, where I got bar mitzvahed. When I had my bar mitzvah, I cried all day because there was a dais after the bar mitzvah, and all the kids sit in a line on a stage, and all the grown-ups are over there. I wanted my best friend, who was a boy, who I loved, to sit next to me. But he couldn't.
Because?
Because it had to be two
Boy,
girls.
girl, boy, girl.
Boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. So I cried all day in the bathroom. And there's a painting I did of that here. And it's called My Miserable Bar Mitzvah. Oh. And it's one of like 4 or 5 Jewish paintings I've done over a period of years, where that is kind of suppressed into the painting. It's not out of the painting, it's under the painting. Because I always felt, I think it was Derek Parfit, the philosopher, the moral philosopher, who said that things that happen in the world stay with families for like 5 generations. So I grew up, like in the town I grew up, I actually didn't know there were non-Jewish people, let alone people of color, until I was like 15. And I was never harassed for being gay until my mother had a...
You're jumping ahead.
Oh, okay.
We're not on the gay question yet.
Okay,
the Jewish.
It's actually a prelude to the gay question. So did you know, well, the next question is about whether you knew about homosexuals growing up. And I'm going to come back to you, Ross, in a second, because obviously you knew about
Can I finish the...
Jewish.
Well, let's come back to that then. Okay. So Jewish, we can stand up for a second. The question was whether being Jewish or Judaism
being
had an effect on your identity.
Being Jewish, because of where I grew up, because of the history of my family, because of the Depression, my parents came from Brooklyn. It's everybody here had the same story, I'm sure. How poor they were. And you heard it all the time, how poor they were. All the brothers and sisters slept in the same room. Why you have to eat all your food, and the minute that my grandparents left Poland and Russia because of pogroms, they were very poor. My father was very poor at the beginning of his life and was not at the end. The minute he made any money, he moved to out of Brooklyn. So that was the trajectory of most Jewish people, actually, of my generation.
So in a way, it was
Now they're all running back to Brooklyn.
Right there. But there was
we are.
Yeah, but it was an economic identity, really, that we grew up with.
It was something more than that. It was push too. It was push. It was and this was always the kind of. This is why I always say there's so many identities that go on in everybody all the time. That consciousness is a very, kind of multi-layered. Set of variables. Where I grew up, success was measured very clearly.
And that was tied to one's Jewish identity within this community, that this is what Jews did. I mean, you had to be successful, you had to go to college, you had to be educated, and you had to make money. Yeah. I mean, let's face it. So let me ask the homosexual question.
5 towns.
So what were you aware of in the 60s? I'm about 10 years younger than the two of you, so I grew up post-Stonewall. I'm not young anyway. I'm still not young, but I grew up in a very different world from the world in which you grew up. So I'm curious, Deb, what was your understanding of gay people growing up as a teenager on Long Island?
I really had none. I mean, I didn't know anyone who was out, who was older. I'll say one thing about how we grew up, which is so different than, I don't know about you, but much younger people, like our friends' kids. The separation between parents and children was big. It was much bigger. The helicopter thing, like we just couldn't wait to leave, period.
And they couldn't wait for us to leave.
And my mother used to say, when you leave at 18 and never come back again, I mean, she couldn't wait. And I was the favorite. I love to say that, but it was true. And but
how many?
3. but our generations were so differentiated that, and they certainly, I didn't think they knew any gay people. I came to find out that when we would go to Seder's at our neighbor Bernice and Jerry's behind us, evidently there was an uncle and his friend every year, but I have no memory of that. So,
So were you
yeah.
aware of the Stonewall uprising, '69?
No, I wasn't. I was aware Judy Garland died, though.
Everybody knew that. Yes.
That I knew,
Yes.
but I did not know about
For those of you who don't know, Judy Garland's body was on view the day of Stonewall. And many people associate her death with the uprising.
Well,
but,
a lot of people said that's why it happened.
But it turns out it's just folklore.
It's good, though.
Yeah, it's good.
And I did
yes.
know when she died. Also Marilyn Monroe, also Andy Warhol. I
You know
knew
those
that,
things,
but
yeah.
I didn't know gay people to look up to or anything. I mean, I had crushes on my friends, but I also had boyfriends, so.
So was it a confusing time? No?
Not really.
Yeah. Ross, were you aware of
Well,
gay people?
he was
Oh,
crying at his bar mitzvah.
So we know you were crying, but did you know why you were crying?
Yeah, I did. Actually, I in that way, I feel a little bit like an anomaly because I never came out, but I never had to come out. I was never in. Never. I never got harassed. The only time anybody ever said anything was my mother had a yellow car that I drove to school a few days that was pale yellow. And some guy said to me, only fairies would drive a yellow car.
And you went, and?
And so what?
And?
So, when I was 13, I met my best friend, and I kind of fell in love with him until I was like 20. And
Did he fall in love with you?
yeah, he did. And we were like best friends, and he was my parents. I had two sisters, so my parents accepted him as my brother. And he slept over like half of the week. And we had a lot of fun, and it was really nice. We went to NYU together because we wanted to go to college together. We got to NYU. He actually said to me, the past few years, what we've been doing, it actually is called gay, and I'm not gay.
Were you brokenhearted?
I was really, and he met a girl, and they quit NYU and went away together. And yeah, I was brokenhearted for a really long time.
Wow.
And that's actually really helped me because that's when I became an artist.
So you're going to have to help us understand how, did that was that?
Well, I was kind of an artist before, but because after he left, after my first year at NYU, where we lived together in the dorm, and then we got an apartment in the East Village, and he met someone. Like for the next 2 years at NYU, I did not leave my apartment. I couldn't touch anyone, and I didn't want to be touched.
Well, that's such a betrayal. So deep.
It's still...
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. But anyway...
Did your parents ever know who he was to you? Did you ever tell them?
They knew, yeah. They found out because my mother read my journal, and they were very upset, and they sent me to psychoanalysis in high school.
How'd that go?
What? 4 times a week, and I had a very sympathetic psychoanalyst who said, nothing you're doing is wrong. But told my parents he's trying to cure me.
Deb, when did you share with your parents that you were gay?
Oh, well into my relationship with Diane. So 7 years into a committed relationship. And really, when I told my mother, I said, everyone else knows, even Grandma. She said, Grandma kept telling me. because Diane and I would do Thanksgiving with her, with my sister and her husband, and we would do holidays, and I lived with Diane, and we had a house upstate, and, you know, my mother kept telling my grandma kept telling my mother, so then I told her, and then she cried, and then it was a thing. You know, but I was 35. I mean, I wasn't like 17.
You know, what's funny with me is that I actually...
Ross, can you just...
Oh, so I actually never discussed it with my parents. I never admitted it or didn't admit it, but then they did seem... I had a lot of very close, always through my life, very close women friends who I spent a lot of time with, so they were very relieved that I wasn't bringing... I didn't have like best friends anymore. So, but they never said anything. And then there was an article actually in the early 90s in the style section of the New York Times where it said, he's gay. It's when I was having a show at the Guggenheim. It was like, he's gay.
This is an article about you.
Yeah, on the front page. And my father called me up and said, it's okay.
And you said, I know.
I said, I know.
I know.
And I'm really glad we didn't have to talk about it.
So what was it like for a young artist in New York in the 1970s? Ross and then Deb.
Well, I'm sure she'll confirm this from her point of view as a woman, but it was a very skewed toward a kind of, I thought, very intense, hetero, macho, male-dominated, world. I mean, I actually thought that's why, of course it was Jasper Johns, but they were like already icons and Warhol. But my generation, where painting was being, kind of resurgent, it was all like these guys.
So how did they greet you? Or did they not greet you?
What?
I said, or did they not greet you?
They were. I was friendly with some of them. I mean, my best friend was Julian Schnabel. So, but still, it was like he was weird about that, and I always thought all of them were a little bit weirded out, uncomfortable, even though they weren't. And my work wasn't like theirs anyway, so I always thought, it was okay. I mean, it's okay to feel like an outsider. I felt actually comfortable not feeling like one of them.
And Deb, what was it like for you?
Well, I would just make a adjustment to what Ross said, because he's really talking about the late 70s into the 80s. And my experience was I was on the Whitney program in 72 and then moved in 73 and a half, 74 for good. And
moved here for good.
Moved here from Pittsburgh, from college. So, and my experience, Ross, which I think you're going to agree actually, when I first came to town, there was an unbelievable amount of fantastic painting being done by women. And it was sort of the height of second wave feminism. And Pat Steer, Joan Snyder, Elizabeth Murray, Susan Rothenberg.
That's a little later, you're right.
What you're talking about is a little later. This was a little earlier. And so to me, it looked like, oh God, I could go on and on. Lois Lane, Jennifer Bartlett, there was an enormous, powerful paintings being done by women. So,
but they were still not getting the attention.
It was a smaller art world.
But still, they were underrated, all of them.
I have a really,
well, when you think about it, I remember because that's when the thing kind of cracked open at some point with, I forget it was either Linda Nochlin or Rosalind Krauss or Barbara Rose wrote an article, why aren't there any great women painters?
Well, that was 1971, and that was Linda Nochlin, for sure.
And she was one of my professors at Vassar
Okay,
College.
Yeah.
so when
And
that happened,
yeah.
I think that was a kind of a little bit of a watershed moment. And listen, I started showing in the late 70s with Mary Boone, who wouldn't acknowledge that women could be quote unquote great painters. And because I remember Barbara Kruger saying, well, there are as many bad women painters as there are bad men painters. So I don't know, it's like.
So, Deb, was there a distinction because you were gay? Was there any distinction because of that? Or were you accepted as a woman artist without prejudice?
I wish there was a timeline that I could do on that to talk about all this, because the context and the timing is really important.
So maybe you can take us through it.
I'm going to tell you my timeline.
That'd be great.
Okay, so Linda writes the article in 1971. I was in college, paid no attention, and really just thought it'll be me and Georgia O'Keeffe. There were no women in my textbooks, in my art history classes, maybe Georgia O'Keeffe.
So let me take you off the timeline for a second. How did you then come to decide to be an artist, given what you saw out
Well, I
there?
didn't know there was a problem when I was 5. I didn't know there was a problem actually till about 1979, because when I showed up, and I didn't go to grad school, I came right to New York to be a famous waitress. So I did, and I was actually. And
Maybe that's when I met you. Where was
Broome Street, everybody met me at Broome Street Bar.
Oh, that's of course.
I'm sure.
I used to go to Broome Street all the time.
And I was there all the time, making tons of money.
And John Lennon and Yoko Ono used to sit right next to me.
It was really fabulous, and I was there. It was really my social education, unfortunately, was at Broome Street Bar, because it wasn't where I grew up. So, my experience is this. I moved to New York, I'm 22, right out of college. I get this great waitress job. I had a few, and then I ended up at Broome Street really quickly, and I stayed there all through till 81. And what I saw and the art world, remember this is pre-Ronald Reagan. Reagan is not president yet. New York's a mess. It's Jimmy Carter, it's Ford, it's, Ford to New York dropped dead. I was here. And the art world was struggling, tiny, and not what it became since Ronald Reagan. And what I saw at Reese Paley, what I saw at Paula Cooper, these galleries that were really big then, were these women. And it was sculptors too, Jackie Windsor, Eva Hess. Had a show at the Guggenheim my last year of high school that changed my life. But really, Pat Steer being incredibly important to me personally in terms of my work, Elizabeth Murray changing my life, seeing her work. I can name about 5 other, Louise Fishman, Joan Snyder, Mega, and so what I thought was, it's the first time I actually had influences that were female, because I was used to walking around MoMA by myself and the Met and looking at men and looking at men and looking at men. It does explain my work. It's like my first loves in art are male painters. But this was the first collection and group of women that could be my heroes, my sheroes. And they really, really, truly were, and they really changed my work. And in my estimation, when I write the art history book I will never write, it'll say, and then something happened towards the end of the 70s, and things really changed. And it was literally the eve of Ronald Reagan and Reaganism. And that was the eve of Mary Boone. And I recently just wrote this thing down where it was like, Mary Boone, Reagan, the rise and fall of the art world in the United States. Because honestly, it's like if you start with Mary's article in New York Magazine in 1982, and there's sort of the scene in the early 80s, which were all men, all painting. There was not a woman as Ross said that Mary paid any attention to, but nobody else did either. And to me, having come right out of the 70s and all this incredibly important painting by women, it was a shock because this door kind of slammed right as I was about to knock on it. And it was, I didn't have the language yet for it, but every woman I knew felt it who painted. And a lot of women sort of changed and went over to photography because they couldn't even imagine competing with what was starting to be the art world as we know it, which meant suddenly there was this enormous amount of money coming in. Mary was the perfect person to shepherd in a generation of artists painters who all happened to be male. And as I like to say, it's like, sorry, Kerry James Marshall, in my humble opinion, is a genius. He's the genius to me of my generation of painters. But Mary Boone wasn't going to show him in 1980 any more than she would have shown me. So it was a white, male, mainly straight situation. And someone like me kind of went to everybody's dinners and lunches, and I was like a bunch of girls who would go, and we were like the cheerleaders for the guys. And then year after year after year, the discrepancy between what was happening for our friends who are men, including my friend Julian, who I was on the Whitney program with, was excruciating. Yeah. So that's my experience of the 70s into the 80s.
I'm going to jump ahead because I would love to continue this track for the rest of our talk, but I have Jewish questions to ask. So I noticed...
I agree with what she said.
Yeah.
Her timeline is very good.
But?
The timeline.
He likes my timeline.
And what's actually very interesting is when I was at Cal Arts... that was in 1970.
Pat was there.
Pat Steer was there. She was.
Can you hold up your microphone?
She was really important for me.
Can I tell you something, Ross?
I loved Pat. I loved her.
I usually say, when I used to give this talk a lot about my work, I don't anymore, but I used to say Pat and Elizabeth, but mainly Pat at Cal Arts, but that generation of women made content available to your generation of men. Because before then, it was like all this hard-assed abstract painting. And that they gave you guys permission, I think of Pat in particular at Cal Arts, to give a generation of use permission to get into...
I feel like I'm getting blamed.
No, why? Pat gave you permission for your content.
So let me move on to another question.
Now we're going to get to the content.
I noticed, Deb, that when I Googled you, there's that little summary on the right side of the page.
Yeah.
And it reads, and I have a follow-up for you, Ross. It reads, Deborah Kass is a Jewish American artist.
Oh,
now, why do you think
I wish I was.
Why do you think you're identified as a Jewish American artist, and what does it mean to be a Jewish American artist?
I'm convinced that they'll put you in the smallest category possible. Uh-huh. I mean, I obviously didn't write that, and it has not helped my career.
I always, I used to think.
But wait, what does it even mean?
It means that I was the poster girl for a show at the Jewish Museum called Too Jewish. Uh-huh. And it was the first and only show ever devoted to an exploration of Jewish identity in contemporary art. And it was 1996, I think.
So that's...
Too Jewish.
Yes, Ross.
Ross, you have to hold the microphone up. No one hears the question. So Ross said...
Despite Ross, it was a big deal. But, as the poster girl, it didn't do me any... Uh-huh. It wasn't hip.
So that's followed you all these years.
Unfortunately, it has. Yeah. And I think it's a shame. But, it's not a shame.
It's
fine.
It is what it is. I mean,
no,
you got out of it.
Obviously not.
No, it's right there. I found it today.
And I just think it's one of these things where... there's a lot of unconsciousness in the world. What can I say? Yeah. That's all.
No, it's
exactly.
It's in my world, in the journalism world, gay journalist Eric Marcus. It's like, how about just journalist?
Yeah.
But it does.
Listen, it could be woman painter just as easily.
Right. And so,
but that would be bigger.
That would, yes.
You have to put yourself in other. Well, I don't want to get into it.
So Ross, when I Googled you, that little summary on the right side of the page reads, Ross Bleckner is an American artist, but your Jewishness still figures into your work. And
but
your
what?
Jewishness figures into your work. And so my question is, how does Jewishness figure into your work?
It said that in the right. In the
No. That's my question.
He's appalled. It's like, please, don't call me Jewish. Don't call me a Jewish artist.
I'm not appalled.
Whatever
by
you
it.
do.
No, the summary
She's
simply
right
says,
about the fact that, it's like decadism. People, what they want to describe you in the smallest terms possible so that they can move on.
Right.
There's a lot of
Right.
people, there's a lot going on.
Right.
They want to deal with it and push it aside
Right.
as quickly as they can.
so you're an American artist, but you do Jewish stuff. So how does your Jewishness figure into your work?
Everything that you are figures into your work in every possible way at different times. You go back and forth in terms of content and subject and feeling. Things that you push away, things, that you did a few years ago. And when you look at now, you think, what was I thinking? Why would I have done that? Piece of shit, But yeah, sometimes I feel that underneath the skin, a lot of things, there's so much more in people's work that speaks to repression than it does expression. The things that they can't express, but somehow winds its way into their work through many choices, through anything.
I think of that painting that's here at this museum.
Okay, but that painting was around Stonewall.
Mm-hmm. So for those who don't know the painting, it's a rainbow flag with a Jewish star underneath
the surface.
What year is that
Embossed.
painting, Ross?
When was Stonewall? I forgot.
Stonewall was 69. Was it for Stonewall? Was it Stonewall 25?
No, it wasn't Stonewall. I'm getting confused. It was
it
like
Stonewall
1990.
25? So it was 1996?
Yeah, no, 1990, I think.
1990, okay.
So it was the time when identity politics started to really come up in the art world.
Exactly.
So Deb,
and it was also the time in 1990, I had been president. My work with the Kriya kind of figured into this because I had worked a lot with the theme of commemoration and
Right.
that, the idea, I just wanted, to put that in there, put that into the mix of my work.
I want to say something about your work at that time because it was really important. Ross's work in the 80s, late 80s, particularly in relationship to AIDS, was extraordinarily moving. And I always remember that painting, The Gate. And there was a little one that I always wished I'd bought. And then there was a big one. But I remember that at the height of the AIDS crisis, your work at Mary Boone, I remember one show, I have the chills. I don't know which show at Mary's it was, but it was definitely the late 80s. And I remember it being like going to the opera and seeing La Traviata. Like it was so moving. And that you had somehow brought the beauty of this combination of crisis and beauty and memory and emotion that was so profound. It was such a profound show.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Deb, I'm going to ask you one. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ross. Just hold your microphone up.
I just want to finish this. There are times, it kind of reminds me of something that Philip Guston said, that he was in his studio trying to figure out how to adjust the painting. Should it be more red or more blue? And then he went out of the studio and he thought to himself, what does it matter? With the world the way it is, it doesn't, that's not what's important. And I kind of flashed on that. He said that a long time ago, and I realized that there are times that life ruptures from what we believed or what we thought. one of the big ruptures for me, obviously, was 1981, the article in the New York Times. And watching a friend of mine, who's here, knew, named Bill Schwedler, who was a really good painter, a great-looking guy, very much into the gay scene at the time, which was, mustaches and, that 70s thing. And I saw him hobbling down the street one day in Tribeca, and he is like a mache. I said, "What's wrong, Bill?" He said to me, "I had to get rid of my cats. They had Parvo disease." I'm thinking, what the Parvo disease? Like a month later, he's dead. So that happened a lot. Like people I would see or speak to and didn't call me back, and I'd be annoyed. They called me back, and then a month or two later, I'd ask somebody who knew them, "Why don't they call me back?" And guess what, Rose? They died. Like, they didn't even want anyone to know then that they were sick or that they died. They went home to Ohio, wherever. So anyway, the idea that we're here for 90 years was like a dream. So early, the idea of industrial optimism of the 60s, the 70s, that our parents grew up with, got ruptured, and the sense of early mortality came into being, which nobody would have ever thought of at 30 years old or 29.
But it was in your work. You used it in your work.
Yeah, but then I realized I was painting abstract paintings, and I realized that was not sufficient at that moment. Maybe I wanted to get back to it. I love abstract painting, but something has to pass through me, is passing through me whether I like it or not. And like you said before, like being Jewish, being gay, then this crisis, those are the things that, either rise to the top or fall to the bottom, depending on where on the spectrum emotionally you are. The same thing happened. I don't want to really get into this. I know she's going to go ballistic.
Quick, because I have a question for Deb, and then we have to get to the audience.
The next rupture came the night Donald Trump got elected.
Okay, we're going to move on from there. Yeah.
No, I just
agree.
thought you would
Both.
I felt like I have to. My work has to deal with this somehow.
But both of you, and one of the things that struck me about your AIDS work and a painting you have in the gallery here now, is that you've both dealt with rupture points. That painting of the eyeglasses, you look at it and it's an abstract work. And then in this context here at this museum, of course, I realized that wasn't just a painting of any glasses.
Right, and I don't think it's an abstract work.
It's not.
I mean, it's got representation and stuff in it. But yeah, no, they're the glasses from Auschwitz. Yeah. That was actually the first Jewish painting I made, that painting. And so that it ended up here because Norman bought it from Simon, actually, from Simon Watson.
How did you come to paint it?
Well, this is a good question. As our friends were dying, and as Reagan and Bush were in power,
Didn't care.
and as abortion was being curtailed, and as women's rights were being curtailed, and as ERA wasn't passing, and as there was also, that was going on. But at the same time, what really has become known as multiculturalism was starting to percolate in women's studies programs really earlier, in the early 80s, mid 80s. And by far the most interesting reading I was doing was literary criticism. And out of these sort of nice girl English departments, where smart Jewish women got their PhDs and then taught at Pembroke, or Smith or Columbia. Suddenly there was the Gender and Culture series with Nancy K. Miller and Carolyn Halperin, and there was Gubar and Gilbert, and there was all this fantastic writing around the history of literature and through the lens of feminism. And these were nice, smart girls who had good teaching jobs, and feminism affected them and changed the way they saw their own disciplines. So this is where, I mean, Black critical theory law theory is part of this moment. All of this gender and culture stuff in, Eve Sedgwick. I was reading all this
Judith
stuff.
Butler.
Judith was a little bit later. She was like early 90s. This is the 80s stuff. Judith Butler really came out of this, but so did women's studies departments came out of this. Black studies departments came out of critical race theory, and it was all bubbling up in the 80s, and AIDS was happening, and there was all this AIDS
And then
activism.
queer studies departments.
And, well, Eve Sedgwick really is the beginning of the queer studies, but it all germinated and started earlier and grew out of this. And while I was reading all this really exciting stuff, and Cornel West and Patricia Williams, I mean, I could give you a list. My reading list was fantastic then. Bell Hooks, and it was all these people like rethinking history the way our generation, not yours, but ours, learned it. So the canon, it was all about firing the cannon, but the canon in art history, which was all male and all white. The canon in literary history, which was all male and all white. All of this was being dismantled by these kind of brainiacs at Columbia and Pembroke and there and here and there and Harvard. And through these lenses of race, through the lens of feminism, and then through the lens of queerness, all this started. So I was reading all this work and went, there's a couple things missing here. There's one big thing missing here. Aside from the fact that very little of this is really happening in the art world, forget that, but just in terms of thinking, there's nothing in here talking about Jewishness. And it's not that I had some big identity. I mean, it's like how we grew up. It was who we were. It's who everyone we knew was. But it was a big gaping hole, because one thing we did grow up with, on top of the Depression, on top of the pogroms, was the aftermath of World War II. And me going, I was born 7 years after the liberation of Auschwitz. This is something I always knew. And in the beginning of multiculturalism, there was just nothing about Jewishness. So the painting out there is my first attempt at it. And I'd been reading a ton of Holocaust stuff too, I don't know, because I never had before, and it was sort of tangential to all this other stuff I was doing. And so that particular painting it's actually exactly what Ross is talking about. How many things are you? You are many, many things. So the big eye in the middle is from a manuscript, an illuminated manuscript. I made one up, but it has gold leaf. And then the top left, I think it is the Lucy bodies. And when I grew up, Charles Schulz was my first famous artist that I wanted to be and looked up to and wrote to, and he wrote to me, and yes, it's a good story. And it was like very encouraging. And so that was Lucy, because I identified with Lucy when I was 8 and 9. And then there was on the right side the Jasper Johns, The Critic Sees. So it was the painting is called Subject Matters, and subjectivity and who is the subject was a big part of this conversation as all of this theoretical stuff was being developed. So it's about subjectivity. So it's the Auschwitz eyeglasses, the Jasper Johns eyeglasses with the mouths, me saying eyes, stuff like that.
It's arresting, and it's a privilege to have you describe it.
Thank you.
To us. Thank you. I have one more question for Ross, and then I'm going to turn to the audience. So if you have questions, get ready. And there's a person with a microphone, and since this is being recorded, you'll want to ask the question using the microphone, and questions only, no comments, because we don't have a lot of time. So Ross, you brought something with you today. And before we go to questions in the audience, I wanted to ask you why you brought it and what it is.
Well, why I brought it is because part of, like I said, part of when I was doing these paintings.
So people can hear you.
When I was doing these commemorative paintings, I was thinking about a lot of things that were going on around me, but also historically. So I did remember me, remember them.
Killer.
But I also did one with the Jewish star underneath, a stripe painting, not the one here, but then I did the one here. So it was remember them, actually dealing with the kind of legacy that I remember from my grandfather talking, or my father talking, about hunger and poverty and pogroms and displacement. And interestingly enough, I mean, I really resisted for reasons I don't know why. But last night I went to see Fiddler on the Roof. It is,
Last night?
Yes, last night. Fantastic. Really fantastic. But everything in there is going on now. That's what amazed me about the play. It's all about migration, moving, being moved, tradition, breaking of tradition. I mean, so much of the politics now, instead of Jews, they're Mexicans. I mean, you could just move around groups all the time because it's always the other.
So what is that?
So anyway, what this is
And for those of you who can't see, I'm
I
pointing to a
actually
book.
noticed at some point my longing for like a spiritual being in my life, because I'm not religious, always comes back somehow or another. And I actually did notice by looking at like a lot of places that the head of every great monastery, Buddhist monastery in America, is Jewish. When you look at the names, you can just see they're Jewish. So I'm thinking, geez, so they're called Jubes.
Jubus.
Yeah, so I decided to be a Jubu. So I went away to a monastery where the Roshi was Joan Halifax, who's this wonderful, brilliant, feminist, Jewish Roshi. And I kind of got involved in that world, and I found out that this Marxist, feminist, lesbian, who runs a synagogue, a group of Jewish theorists, queer theorists, rewrote the Bible. And this is what they came up with, a complete rewrite of the Old Testament.
Wow.
So actually this kind of brought me a little bit back to wanting to think about if the kind of spirituality I look for, maybe it is Jewish. After all, maybe, just because I had a bad bar mitzvah, maybe it shouldn't ruin it forever.
I had a bad bar mitzvah too. I should probably read the book. So I'm going to take questions from. Did you want to read something before we go to the audience?
Let me.
Just hold the microphone up so people can hear you.
I just want to read you just one thing. I mean, it's kind of amazing that they did this. This is about a passage that they took from the Bible somewhere, and they kind of translated it and then rewrote it. It's called it's about anonymous sex, and it's called For Unexpected Intimacy. And it says, in the dark, in a strange place, our father Jacob encountered a stranger with whom he grappled all night. He never knew the stranger's name, yet their encounter was a blessing, which turned Jacob into Israel and made him realize, I have seen God face to face. That comes from Genesis 32:13. May this ultimate time with another person be an encounter with angels that allow us to both touch and see the divine in the name of God of Israel, who created passion and wove it throughout creation, turning strange places into holy ground and strangers into a source of blessing. They rewrote the Bible. It's so beautiful.
What are the names of the authors?
You have to look at the book, if you can pronounce that in Hebrew. Or, there are so many authors, it goes on for like 10 pages.
Well, it's a Siddur Sha'ar Zahav.
Which means what?
I have no idea. I went to Orthodox Hebrew school. We learned all the words, but we didn't learn the translations.
It means Golden Gate.
Golden Gate?
Yeah, it's for the gay synagogue in San Francisco.
Thank you.
Okay, there you
Thank
go.
you. So questions from the audience, just put up your hand and Jenna will come around with the microphone. And if you don't have questions, I have another 6 waiting to be asked. In the back.
So this question is for Jewish American artist Deborah Kass, with a Jewish mother on Long Island, and Jewish mothers are often disappointed. Which one was actually more challenging for her, that you were gay or that your wife was not Jewish? And was there a point at which your Jewish mother affirmed that she thought you were a success?
Oh, man. I don't even know where to start with that. None of it was, and I'm
None of it was good enough.
I'm going to preface this with I was the favorite, okay? Just so you know, it's like, none of it was good. None of it was good. They really didn't want me to be an artist. It wasn't like these parents who think it's fabulous. My kid's so creative. You know, my mother, up till when she died, was like, you sure you don't want to go into real estate? I mean, it used to be...
What? I don't know, when did she die?
The day before Barack Obama was elected.
Okay, so you were doing well.
Yeah, but I honestly...
So why did she think real estate would be better? Just on that level.
You know, I'm tempted to tell you some of my mother's last words to me right now.
That maybe...
Because I said, well, Mom, at least you got to see me be a success. And I don't want anyone feeling sorry for me, so I won't say what she responded to, literally on her deathbed. But my sister will never get over it. Really.
It sounds like it wasn't good.
It wasn't good. And I was the favorite.
What?
And I was the favorite. So
But wait, we have to see it in the context of they didn't understand.
Oh, there's no way she understood. She
Exactly.
didn't have a clue. I mean, she was very uninvolved. My mother was not a typical Jewish mother. She was remarkably waspy. Seriously. And I'm saying that to a room full of Jews. So you know what I mean. She was a little cool.
My mother was really unhappy.
Unhappy that you were an artist?
No. She was basically unhappy in a marriage.
Right.
And she used to take, the only time I ever saw her happy was when she painted. She used to take little painting classes, and she used to paint little paintings. This little. And I used to paint with her. And I think that's why I love little paintings and why I love painting them. But she was never happy or unhappy. But by the 5, there's only one criteria in the 5 towns. Are you making money or not? So, starting from when I graduated college, my parents were very liberal. They didn't care what I did, who I saw. They never asked. They didn't, basically, you know, my father was busy off with, you know, his life. My mother was busy being unhappy. And he used to ask me, and he helped me. Well, he did help me, because that also was part of it. I think, you know, that he supported me when I came to New York after college, but he did used to ask me, when can it stop? I kept saying, I promise 6 months. That went on for 10 years.
It's so interesting. We all come from Jewish families, but such different,
Very different.
Jewish families.
I want to just say something to that question and to what you're saying. I think growing up in the suburbs, our parents' generation was under enormous amounts of pressure to make money, which mine did not, by the way, and was much more edgy in my household, and it was the money thing was really a problem. But for women in particular, and for all of my friends from high school, many of whom, I have like these lifelong friendships, and we were all very involved with each other's mothers and each other, and very real relationships with the moms and between us. And not one of my friends did anything like their mothers. Our mothers had two options. You're a housewife, or you're a housewife and a teacher. And my mother was a housewife and a teacher, and that was it. And my oldest friend, who just died, how she figured this out from Rockville Center, Long Island, I will never know, got her PhD and became one of the first agriculture economists, female, if not the first in the country. My other friend became a branding person with a big business that she sold at 60 and retired. My other friend got into computers in the 70s because she did badly on her LSATs. And she was devastated, and I just said, Vicky, do the computer thing, it's the future, and it was. So every single, and
you're Deb Kass.
And I'm me.
Yeah.
And like no one stayed in Rockville Center. Everybody left. Every woman I know had a really well, not every, but my pals did very interesting things. And I think there was a general feeling, it's certainly my mother, my sister's a therapist with a practice. There was no question that we weren't going to work. The world changed, the economy changed. That middle class, whether you were middle class or upper middle class, that world is over anyway. That fell apart in the 70s. It's been falling apart ever since. So we were going to work. But moms didn't, really, unless they taught. And I think there was always a sense with my mother, and I don't know about the other ones, well, I do know, that even though they were proud of us, that they felt a little rejected, that they took it as a little bit of a rejection of their way of life. And someone like my mother, who was really a brilliant woman, she knew intellectually that her world that was over, because she was very political. We talk politics. It's the one thing we could talk about. And the way, actually, to go back to the gay thing, the way I really my mother finally figured out it was absolutely fine was when she came out to her canaster girlfriends in Boca. About me. And she said, honey, I had the most interesting experience, I was more than that. I was, with the girls, I was playing canaster, and, I'm very proud of you. Sometimes. Very proud of you. And, I was talking about you and your life. And I said you were gay. And Rhonda said, well, my daughter's gay too. And, Helen said, well, my son's gay. So out of like 4 people, like 3 had gay kids. And, we're in our 30s and 40s, we're not kids. And I said, so Ma, you had a coming out experience. You came out. Wasn't it fabulous? She said, it's fantastic. And one of the moms had a very important Harvard, Marjorie Garber's mother, who wrote Vested Interests. That was Rhonda, I think. Mm-hmm. Vested Interest, a really important book, 1992, about gender, sexuality, trans stuff. And she was the head of some department at Harvard forever. Like a major, major important book. That came out the year I did Yentl. And I believe she talks about Yentl in that book. So we were like completely on the same wavelength, me and Marjorie Garber, who played cards, and mother played cards with my mother and came out to my mother when my mother came out. So eventually it was more than cool. It was great because times changed.
Now,
Really?
let me add another thing. The place where I grew up, I mean, it was very hard. The thought of being an artist was so foreign.
So foreign.
But I'll tell you one thing. What was the takeaway from all of those places, and even in a way a Jewishness, for me, was always the striving to educate yourself. The things that you are excluded from, you could excel at other things. That is Jewish history. That's Freud, that's Marx, that's Levi Strauss. You know, they literally invented other ways of thinking, other ways of doing things, because they were outside. They were the other. They couldn't, some of the most important thinkers and I mean, in the Middle Ages, everybody knows this, but nobody could handle money, Jews could handle money, so now they own the media. Well, they deserve it.
You mean we?
We'll take I think we have time for one more question over here on the right. Am I right, Jenna? We have time for one.
So, how have you accepted or resisted Jewish identity in your work, and same for gay identity? Do you think the resistance is related?
Can you repeat that a little louder? I wasn't able to hear you.
And who are you asking the question to? I didn't hear it.
How have you accepted or resisted Jewish and gay identities in your work, and do you think resistance to each is related?
I'm going to do this first. I don't know if you're asking me, but we'll both answer. Let me take charge right now. For me, this was all within the context of, as I said, this theoretical stuff of the 80s and early 90s that really became college education ever since. So I've basically, like Ross says, it's all in there. In my particular case, I let it out constantly. All of my work is all of me, which is basically what you said, Ross, right? Yeah. And I'll just say, once I got into it, there was no resistance. And all of my work is really feeding off who I am. I mean, I didn't talk about my bodies of work and how they have developed, but the gayness and Jewishness is in all of it, as is the feminism. And I do like to say, feminism is the one thing I picked. The rest of it is what is. Right. But feminism is the politics, and feminism is the driving thing because it's choice. And I have a complicated relationship to identity stuff. I mean, we all do, but it can be so oppressive. And I'm in like a million Stonewall shows now. It's like, ugh, please. And I mean, really, it's so boring.
Me.
I don't know why. I don't know why. Well, they need women.
That's the resistance.
They have so many men, and they need women.
I'm fine.
They need women, and they know my name, so I'm in them. And
Zachary, you should be in.
And I forgot where I was going with that. Anyway, I know what it was. It's this. It's that identity is this thing that you're born into. You don't have a choice. You come out black, you come out Jewish, you come out straight, you come out gay, and it's what you are. But that with which you identify as a child, and when you're constructing what am I and who am I and what am I looking at, why do I love this painting in the New York Times of a nose job and I'm 12 years old? Why is that talking to me? But I like that. And why do I like this song? And why do I like these lyrics? And why do I like these words? And I know it has something to do with what I identify with. It's a much more active thing than identity. It's a verb. You identify with something. You are constructing your consciousness. You're constructing your idea of being and who you want to be from the world. And to me, that's a much more interesting proposition.
I mean, that's really, you're describing how consciousness works. I mean, we say now that everything exists on a spectrum. So what you're talking about is a spectrum. You know, you're talking about which, you know, you could go back and forth on the spectrum, and you can kind of, you know, put things forward or push them down based on just anything. Your mood, the day, the year, your life, the
Emotion.
the news.
The news.
You know, there's so many factors
Right.
that kind of work into the spectrum of our consciousness. You know, she says she chose feminism. Well, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm choosing. But
I can recommend feminism.
On that note,
will you give me a reading list, please?
Absolutely.
Okay.
on that note,
I'm in.
please join me in thanking Deb Kass and Ross Bleckner for joining us tonight.
I always thought it would be very